Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome again to Sufi Ibrahim Krebs's YouTube channel. Let me see, I'm going to put on this light. Maybe this will be better. Okay, not better. Excuse us for the technical delay. So we have probably about a month left before Ramadan, and during Ramadan we won't be doing these for the time of Ramadan because we'll be too busy with other things. So we got to get in the most important issues and the most important talks, and that's what we're starting to do. Okay, now today's talk is going to be very fundamental. Don't worry if you don't get it the first time. I've been saying this for 25 years, maybe more. There's still no one that I know that seriously gets what I'm saying about mind productions and thought production. Maybe some Buddhist, but certainly no one in the Islamic, Christian, Judaic world gets this. So if you don't get it the first time, listen over and over and over. I now understand why Allah repeats himself so often in the Quran, because people are creatures of habit. And we've all been trained to overuse our minds. Okay. This is actually something relatively new, the overuse of the mind. Okay, it's relatively new in the existence of man. There are a number of statistics depending on where you start man's history and which of the species you consider consistent with the term man, but let's say a few 100,000 years, and it's only in the last 2.5, 3 millennia that this problem has occurred. Now, for those who love conspiracy theories, they almost always end up being about the Jews. Okay, they're controlling the universe. In case you didn't notice, they're controlling the universe. Astaghfirullah. And that this is most popular, of course, amongst Muslims, used to be very popular amongst Christians until they realized, oops, Jesus and all his apostles were Jews. Maybe there's a problem with being against the Jews. But this talk is going to be about a people that you never hear about, except if you take classes in the university. The Greeks. They started this all with all their different schools of philosophy, which you're welcome to study. Neoplatonic and cynicism and Sophism, not Sufism, Sophism and Stoicism and all these other isms, all started with the Greeks, plus a pseudo-fake democracy, which was only for the citizens of Athens, plus a confusion of sexual roles where they preferred young males to people of the opposite sex. All started with the Greeks. So for those paranoid theorists, if you want to get to the source of the problem, the Greeks controlled the Jews. Wow, that's going to be hard for conspiracy theorists. What do I mean by that? Well, all the Western traditions have been infected, and I use the word advisedly, have been infected and contaminated by Greek philosophy and Greek logic. Where's the proof? This is part of Greek logic, by the way. You need proof. Everything is proof. I saw this guy shoot this lady in front of me. I know it's him. Where's your proof? I think indirectly this comes from Aristotelian logic. It certainly comes from empiricism. Okay. So Judaism changed. If you study the theologians, if you study the commentaries, you'll see that the Talmudists were deeply influenced by Greek philosophy. This is even before the Christians and the Muslims. Then the Christians generated their misunderstood, misnamed theological concepts like Trinity, Son of God. This is also part of logic. This is also from the Greeks. So first you had the Talmudists transforming Judaism. Then you had the theologians transforming Christianity. How so? Well, if Jesus was born from God, which we believe, without a father, then his father must be God. Then he's the Son of God. Logical, huh? Perfectly logical. But wrong. At least according to Muslim theology, which I consider the most correct. But the Muslims didn't get off scot-free. Okay, the Muslims got into this also as soon as they made the mistake of translating all the Greek philosophers into Arabic. So you can see the time of Imam Ghazali, I think that's 14th century. Even before that, the Muslims, the Abbasids, I believe, were the first empire which started translating the Greek scientists and philosophers, and gradually this creeped into Islamic theology as well. Now, I don't know anyone else who's saying this, sorry. This is a marginal position, but I think it's the true one. Okay, and if you want the proof, the proof. Don't forget the proof. The empirical evidence. Okay, thank the Greeks. So, if you want the proof, read the Quran, for Muslims, read the Quran, read the Hadith, read the discussions of the Sahabas, the early Sahabas, and even the early Sufis. And then start reading anything after Imam Ghazali. And you'll see the influence of the logic. Okay? Even he's a great scholar, I'm not going to deny that, but he criticized the philosophers, but he didn't criticize the philosophers enough, or he criticized them for not being believers, for not paying enough attention to revelation. That's true, but he accepted their methodology. That's false. Their methodology is deeply flawed, the philosophers, because they think you can figure everything out with your mind, and you can't. Let me repeat that. You can't figure out reality with your mind. None of the Western religions have figured that out. The Buddhists are more advanced. I don't like it overall as a religion. I find it's imbalanced and there's too much accent on the transcendent. But on this point, the Buddhists got it right from the beginning. Of course, there wasn't much Greek philosophy in Vedanta and in the Hindu tradition of the time from which the Buddha came. So the Buddhists got that the mind is not your ally, is not your friend in this process. The mind is your obstacle. So they talked about mind contents and they called them skandhas or aggregates. And these are all the kind of things that go around in your mind. And they taught their students that the way to enlightenment is to get beyond that. Not through it, beyond it, above it, outside of it. They didn't teach the science of mantik, logic, rhetoric, all these Greek sciences that the Muslims have taken on as their own, unfortunately. Now, if you go back to the history of Sufism, you'll see that what I'm saying is not that far-fetched. We have two iconic stories of Sufis, great Sufis who understood this. Okay. A lot of people listening to this tape are probably aware of that famous iconic encounter between Jalaluddin Rumi and Shams Tabriz. Rumi is a great scholar, full of mind productions, full of Islamic sciences, quote unquote. I hate that term, science, nowadays, it's been so corrupted. Full of Islamic sciences. And he meets his master, Shams Tabriz, who's very high being, and Shams Tabriz, and Rumi was traveling around with books and books, carried by his caravan with him of books. And Shams Tabriz takes his books and he throws them into the well. And he says to him, if you're still attached to your scholarly knowledge, I'll bring all the books out, dry. He had confidence in his powers. I'll bring them all out dry. But if you want real knowledge, leave them there and I'll teach you real knowledge. In other words, leave conceptual academic knowledge. Did you hear that, all you university graduates? Your minds have been contaminated by academic, conceptual, cerebral, abstract knowledge that has nothing to do with reality, most of the time. The other iconic Sufi story is of another great saint, Abu Hassan al-Shadhili, who met his master in Morocco at a place called Jibal Alim, and Ibn Mashish was his master, sent him down the hill 3 times to do ghusl. He didn't think he was having, I don't think, had anything to do with aberrant sexual thoughts. Although some of the more cynical people might. No, get rid of your conceptual knowledge, 3 ghusls. And then he gave him bayat. And then shortly afterwards, not much longer after, he sent him to Tunisia. You can still see the maqam, mashallah, beautiful maqam, outside of Tunis, for 7 years. That's how long it was going to take him to detoxify his mind from all the conceptual knowledge that he had gained. Now, why does this subject concern me? Why does it come up today? It's because as I work with people, and also sometimes just interacting with people, but as I work with people, both spiritually, as Sufi students, as counseling students, as people who are trying to learn about the biopsychosocio-spiritual model, I realize the biggest obstacle in their learning is their mind productions. Individual and collective. We always had individual mind productions, and we always had some collective mind productions also. What our Prophet Muhammad was fighting against was the collective mind productions of the Quraysh of the time. Okay. Now we call these things echo chambers, and all around us are echo chambers, collective mind productions. So we have the echo chambers. Recently had this with a participant in the interactive seminar. The echo chamber of empiricists. Everything is about objective knowledge, data, the scientific method, rational analysis of the data, statistics. Have you ever heard any of those terms? I'm sure you have. This is the echo chamber of empiricism. We're going to figure it out from the outer data. Good luck. We see how well they figured it out. In Quebec, where I practice medicine, I got my license in 1972. They started a system of socialized medicine, l'assurance maladie here, and for 1972, so 52 years, they've been collecting data. And every few years, they reanalyze the data and they bring in the experts and they do their statistical analysis, and the system continues to get worse, day by day, year by year. When I graduated, you could go to any hospital, the one I worked at the Royal Vic, You go to hospital and be seen in the emergency room in an hour. Almost always, sometimes less. Now you can wait 12, 15, 18, 24 hours there. All from this wonderful empirical analysis and statistics and experts and advisory committees, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. There's the proof that that methodology doesn't work. There are lots of other proof. Look at the COVID epidemic and what they did with the statistics, but that's a whole other story. So you have the empiricist echo chamber. Then you have one that I participated in, and that everyone I know who participated in this echo chamber is still stuck there. The empiricist one I was in also. Each of these I'm talking to you from personal experience. This is not theoretical. I've been in each of these places. That's why when people say to me, well, why should I respect your opinion? You know, my opinion is just as good. Sorry, this is going to sound out, but it isn't, because I've seen that opinion. I've seen through that opinion, or Allah let me see through that opinion. I saw through the empiricist opinion, the empiricist echo chamber, when I was still in my 20s. Because I had an insightful girlfriend at the time who told me, you're a positivist, you're an empiricist, and that it broke the spell. But then I got into the other echo chamber, the progressive left, Marxist, socialist, social democratic, whatever you want to call it. They're the ones running the Democratic Party in the United States, the Liberal Party in Canada. And they're running our countries into the ground in all kinds of ways. The progressive left echo chamber. Okay. Then recently, before we get to that one, it's the most controversial one. Then there was the psychological echo chamber. You ever met those people? For everything they have a psychological or psychoanalytic explanation for everything. Oh, this is just projection. This is just transference. This is identification with the parents. Everything, and often it's true, but it's only a partial explanation. So we have the people in the psychological echo chamber. Everything is psychological. Oh, I have this terrible pain in my shoulder. We did an x-ray, it's normal, it's all in your head. Everything is psychosomatic. Everything from schizophrenia to cancer to broken bones, it's all psychosomatic. That's another echo. There's truth in each of these, but not an overall comprehensive truth. And then recently, of course, with what's been happening in the Middle East, we have the ethnic Muslim echo chamber that I won't even get into. Every single ethnic born Muslim on my Facebook page says the same thing about the Gaza situation, over and over and over again, without thinking about it, without coming up with any original ideas, without any insight, and often without knowledge. Some of them have more knowledge than others. Same thing being parroted over and over again. Another echo chamber. Sorry. I left echo chambers a long time ago. Everyone has to figure out, do the research and figure out what is true and what is false. That's what the clever, the intelligent doctors in the United States are now saying about medicine, but it's true of all reality. You have to figure out what is true in Buddhism, in their meditation techniques. What is true in Islam, that has the best aqidah, the best beliefs. What is true in Christianity, they're very helpful to people, very charitable. What is true in Judaism, humanitarianism. They won't think that because of Israel, but there's a strong humanist tradition in Judaism as well, all the way through. And there are Jews out there who are denouncing Israeli behavior. I haven't seen any Muslims out there denouncing Palestinian behavior. Not yet, anyway. When that happens, we'll know we've passed a certain stage of evolution. We're not there yet. So beware. Now, these famous Greeks who got us into trouble in the first place, they had a renaissance. In fact, I think it's called the Renaissance. The age of reason, the age of enlightenment, and they passed on all their, the Yiddish word is Bubamaises, all their shtick to the Europeans. So the biggest promoters of mind productions and abstract thinking are the Europeans. The French and the German, firstly, the British a little bit behind them, and then ultimately, to some extent, the Americans. But the Europeans have taken on the mantle of Greek philosophy. And we were taught, until I met Sheikh Nazim, we were taught in school how wonderful it was, the French Revolution, libération, liberté, égalité, et fraternité. Yeah, go to Paris and see the results. Wala hawla wala quwwata. Okay, so and we're taught to, I see a lot of Maghribians, they're still in admiration in front of the French intellectuals. Really? I went to visit my sheikh in Tunisia. I stopped in Paris with a very lovely Tunisian man who will go unnamed, who was still promoting the grandeur of France. Really? What world are you living in? Paris has a terrible vibe now. All of those Maghribian communities living in the arrondissement, it's like apartheid, really. And there's a lot of, with resentment. The place is in a terrible state. But where did it get started? Which we're all taught to, I think this is wonderful. Descartes says, Je pense donc je suis. I haven't heard anyone, spiritual people, looking at that saying, no! That's the opposite. Je pense donc je suis. I think, so I am. So you're your mind. If that's what you believe, you're in trouble. You're not your mind. But they believe it. And so we get all these mental, conceptual schemas and theories from the French philosophers ever since Descartes. One after another, they spew them out like America puts out billionaires. Okay. One French philosopher after another. I won't even bother naming all of them. Most of them are irrelevant. But some of them became pop here. In France, the intellectuals they're like NFL champions. You know, they're highly esteemed. Oh, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus. You can't say anything. Wonderful people. Well, if you saw what I saw, you wouldn't be so convinced. It took Jean-Paul Sartre 15 or 20 years to get it what was going on in Stalinist Russia. He was still defending the Stalinists. In fact, he was denouncing Camus because Camus saw through it. And he hadn't yet. He was still defending them. This is the product of the great French intellect. And the Germans, they brought us a lot of wonderful philosophy. From Nietzsche, denouncing the idea of God, God is dead, astaghfirullah, to Marxism. Look at the wonderful effects of the German philosophers. Start with Marx, Hegel is another one, Feuerbach, Schopenhauer, Spinoza, all these wonderful philosophers. But let's take Marx because he's the one who made the biggest mark on history. Look at those countries. Look at those countries that tried to follow Marx. China, one of the most tyrannical, manipulative regimes the world has ever known. Russia, corrupt to the core. North Korea, this is just idiotic place, but very oppressive. This is the fruit of mind productions. Most recently, the Muslims have taken on, this is more recent, have taken on big time the mind productions with Islamism, Ikhwan Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood. They can figure it out. The Quran and the prophets, some are not enough. We need these intellectuals to figure out what our religion means for us and look at their results. Okay, in all fairness, they're not as bad as the communists in terms of overall destructiveness, murderousness. But they've corrupted the entire Islamic Ummah with their ideas. I know this, I've told this story before, but I'll never forget Sheikh Nazim confronting them and saying, "You don't understand our religion." He would say, he wasn't afraid, he didn't mince his words. Say, "You don't understand our religion. We are not believing in any Islam, communism, Marxism, feminism. Especially, we're not accepting Islamism. People get the governments they deserve." And when you look at the results of Islamism, I have an article, by the way, you can look it up on the blog SufiPilgrimsProgress.com, about the scourge of Islamism everywhere, and now we have the most recent example. Total devastation and tragedy in Gaza, and the core reason, okay, people, they want to blame America and Israel, and the core reason is Islamism, which is a Marxist, a left-wing theory imposed on an Islamic framework. Islamism, and they have total destruction. This is the net result. So this is very serious stuff, and for those on the spiritual path, this will completely sabotage your spiritual path if you don't get a handle on it. If you buy into your own mind productions and the mind productions of your echo chamber community, you will never make any progress, or you will make a minimum of progress. It doesn't work. So be careful. The first thing you have to do is you have to start looking at yourself, and you have to see where you're getting in trouble with these mind productions. Because there are other things going on in your mind that are not mind productions. You can be having ilham, inspiration. You can be having tajalli, descent of divine wisdom. You can be having opening of the heart. You can see with the eyes of Basira, with inner vision. You can hear with the sound of truth. And those will lead you to the reality. But you have to recognize the difference between the two. One of the ways now that I recognize when I'm getting into mind productions, there are two things that happen. One is when I hear someone who's like one of these university professors who's into his mind productions, I get a bad smell in my head. I think there's a term for this, smelling. I can smell the falsehood of what's being told. The other thing that happens sometimes, if I really try hard to understand, if you read a philosopher, most of the philosophers, you'll see what I mean. You try really hard to you feel your brain is turning into a pretzel. You know, you're twisting it so hard to try to say, what is this guy? I remember having this with some of my Sufi ex-friends who were with the Maria Mia, trying to read someone like Fritz of Schoen, who was essentially a Frenchman who thought in a Germanic way. So he's the full 9 yards European. Try to read his stuff, and the people who say that they understand what he's saying are liars. They're making it up because it's gobbledygook. Look up that word; it's very interesting. All gobbledygook. This is Europeanism in its essence, which we're taught in school. This is to be respected, highly respected. You won't find, if you want to know the examples of people who don't use mind product, who are free of this, it's very ironic, because read what Moses, Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, read any of the Old Testament figures. Sometimes they talk in metaphors, that's a whole other thing. There's no mind productions there. And then read the Talmudists. Read what Jesus says, and then read some of the Christian theologians. Read the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and then read some of the Islamic scholars. You'll see that it's a totally different state of mind. We're trying to get back to the original people, to the people who were able to see and communicate truth simply, not with complex, abstract formula. Just for the sake of okay, I'm just looking at some of my notes here. Just a little anecdote, amusing anecdote, and then a couple more points and we'll close it up. So, I'll give you an example. One of the more popular Buddhist teachers these days is a Vietnamese guy. He's recently deceased. Thich Nhat Hanh, very beloved of many Americans and French people, etc. And if you go through his principles, one of his principles is, and this is a big one also connected with this whole subject, don't hold on too tightly to your opinions. It's right there at the top. If you go to Thich Nhat Hanh basic principle, I think he has 14 basic. The third or fourth one is don't hold tightly to your opinions. So I know a Buddhist who was with us in the Sufi order of the West, who moved on to Buddhism, who was a follower of Thich Nhat Hanh, and then became enraptured with the climate change narrative. So one day I come up to him and I said, how are you doing? I won't name him. How are you doing? He said, oh, I got involved in this new project. It's very inspiring. I said, what's that? It's called Extinction Revolution. Maybe people have heard of it. These are the extreme climate change people. We're on the edge of extinction, in case you haven't noticed. I haven't. Beautiful winter this year in Montreal. Very mild. Thank God. So I said to him, let's call a Buddhist? Let's call him Douglas. Not his name. I said, Douglas, I wasn't objecting directly. I said, are you aware that there are other theories about why the climate is changing? I've studied this. It's on the blog. If you want, are you aware? I didn't say you're wrong. I just said, are you aware that other theories? He looked at me furious. So I thought he didn't understand. I thought he thought I was just promoting right-wing propaganda. So I followed him to the next stand and I said, Douglas, this is not from right-wing militias in America. These are legitimate astrophysicists and scientists with good reputation. He got even more angry. I was going to say, don't you remember the teachings of your guru? But I knew if I said anything more, I was going to get slugged, really. He was that infuriated. Okay, that's called attachment to your mind productions. He was now in the climate change echo chamber, which incidentally is mostly bogus. The smart people have seen through that a long time ago. Climate has been changing on the earth since its beginning, and this is just another change. But he was ready to slug me. That's what I saw. So wisely, I sometimes know when not to speak. Okay, so that's how bad it gets when you come up against people's echo chambers, ideological bubbles. So be careful of it. Sometimes I'm not careful enough, and I attack their echo chamber right away. Probably not very good diplomatically, possibly not good for my physical integrity. Anyway, okay. Now, just in case some of you may at this point be a bit freaked out by this discourse, because it flies against everything you've been taught in our wonderful academic-oriented society, objective scientific society, I realized something recently that seems to be saying the opposite. And that is that foolishness also has its costs. Okay, most people would accept that, but I feel it's necessary to say it now. Okay, overthinking is a huge problem, but being foolish can also be very costly. I was watching the parade yesterday. I'm a big fan of NFL football. Watching the parade in Kansas City, and one person got killed, 20 other people injured by another mass shooting in America. Now they'll go into all the forensics and the details and everything, but this is all a product of foolishness. The American obsession with guns is total foolishness. Australia had a mass shooting, they banned guns, and they haven't had one for 25 years. But no American wants to hear, we love our guns. And when you try to show them how foolish it is, they always have a justification. Oh, it's our Second Amendment rights. Yeah, but the Second Amendment was written 200 years ago. In a totally different context, with people who did have to defend themselves against all kinds. We're in a different world now. My Second Amendment rights to be able to carry an AK-47 or an AR-15 now to shoot up, so I can shoot 100 people all in one time. It's my right. This is foolishness, and it has its consequences. What happened, and the Muslims are not going to like to hear this, but what happened in the Gaza, and Sheikh Nazim was very on top of these kind of activities and very critical of them, is a product of foolishness. What Hamas did there and the Israeli response was totally predictable. This is foolishness. And our prophet in Islam, if people study his life, was everything but foolish. Everything came from good judgment. When he fought, it's because he had to fight. And when he fought, there was always a chance of winning. And most of the time he won. Didn't take on these impossible tasks. This is foolishness. But foolishness always comes with justification. This is something you have to watch out for. The foolish ones and the foolish decisions, they always have a justification. Oh, this is not terrorism. This is our liberation struggle. Well, I guess in a way it is. You're liberating all these people from being in the world because they're getting killed. Liberation. This is our liberation struggle. And most of the Muslims buy it, unfortunately. No, this is self-destruction, foolishness, recklessness, and it should be condemned. We can talk about the Israeli response. There is very problematic also. But for Muslims, we're not responsible for the Israelis. We're responsible for ourselves. And we want to act with intelligence and efficacy and good judgment, not with foolishness and recklessness. Liberating. This is liberation. Well, if this is liberation, I wouldn't want to see what the opposite is. So, and then there's the third example that came to mind, also not a popular idea, but what happened after the invasion in Iraq. Okay, when the Americans went in, originally, I was in favor. I don't like sadistic, nasty, tyrannical leaders like Saddam Hussein. So I thought to myself, the Americans get rid of that nasty leader, the Iraqis are going to be able to develop a prosperous society. No. Right away, fighting with each other. The Sunnis and the Shiites and the Kurds all fighting with each other. And then, as all foolish people do, they blame others. Oh, it's the Americans that did it. No, the Americans did whatever they did, and they were probably at that point not right to do it, but you had an occasion to make your country. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. They have everything they need. Oil, good temperature, wonderful soil, water, everything they need. No, they end up fighting between themselves. More foolishness, more deaths, more destruction, more misery. So foolishness also has its costs. But Everyone knows that, most people know that. So occasionally we have to use our intellect, but not overuse it. We have to use it very intelligently. We have to use it in its right place, and we have to use it in the sense of common sense, not in the sense of overly calculating, manipulating, strategizing, and all these nonsensical modern operations. I hope that's clear. Subhana Rabbika Rabbil Izzati Amma Yasifun, Salamun ala Mursalin, and we're all working on this. Okay? Every day you're making a mistake by believing your mind. Try to find it, as we all are, and see and keep distinguishing the chaff from the wheat. The chaff is your mind productions, the wheat is the reality. Al-Fatiha.